Here's the big question. You're interested in value investing and valuing and evaluating businesses on a deep level, but you don't know how, even after researching for hours, probably dozens of hours, hundreds of hours on the internet, and because nobody else shows you how to do it. This podcast has all those answers and much more about value investing in finance. My name is Jason Rivera. Welcome to Value Investing in Your Car. Value investing should work in every single country, but if you cannot trust the government and officials in the country you're in, then it will not work. Other reasons I don't use net income. One is because after I learned about all the terms, I started coming across Seth Klarman, Joel Greenblatt, Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett. All these guys call EBITDA bullshit earnings. So, I mean, these are some of value investment and finance icons who have produced incredible returns, made a lot of people rich, made themselves rich, built a lot of great companies, so they know what they're talking about. It's just kind of common sense to me. Another reason is the book Financial Shenanigans, which I highly recommend. It talks about how you can smooth earnings over several quarters, how you can kind of manipulate earnings to make them look better. Value investing works best when the stock market, there's some kind of recession, there's some kind of major uncertainty, and long-term uncertainty is best. What is this book? It's called Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win on the Battlefield and in Life, by ex-Navy SEALs, commanding officers and platoon leaders, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. The book is essentially, and I first learned about this book from Tim Ferriss's Tools of Titans. One of the, I don't remember if it was a profile or he said one of the best books he read all year was, when his book was released, was this book, Extreme Ownership, which I believe released in 2015 or 2016. And he's become close friends and interviewed with Jocko Willink, again, ex-Navy SEAL commanding officer. Jocko Willink, I think he's interviewed on his podcast, and I believe he said they've become close friends since interviewing and stuff like that. So that's where I first learned about the book. And the book is essentially, it goes through some battle scenarios from a more strategic perspective and leadership perspective, because one of the authors was a platoon leader in the Navy SEALs, and one was the commanding officer of Task Unit Bruiser. What you're trying to figure out with this metric is the FCF to sales. Again, FCF divided by sales is the metric. It's simple as that. Is how much free cash flow the company produces based relative to its sales. I look for anything above 5% on a consistent basis. Why? I don't remember where I heard this from, because I've been using this metric for years now, but I don't remember where I heard this from. But I remember seeing when I first learned this metric that they considered this the cash machine margin. And I would agree. Anything above 5% on a consistent basis, in my personal anecdotal evidence, after evaluating thousands of companies, puts you probably in the top 2 to 5% of companies in the entire world. ROIC, again, return on invested capital. You can calculate this number many different ways. The way I calculate it is, in my opinion, the most conservative. Essentially, you take EBIT, which is operating earnings, operating margin, operating income, same terms for the or different terms for the same thing, divided by shareholders' equity, which is the amount that's left over after you subtract assets from liabilities on the balance sheet. The money that's left over kind of technically for shareholders. That's why it's called shareholders' equity. Then you add, what do you add? You add in debt, short and long-term debt, subtract cash, and then you add that up, or sum those together, divide the EBIT by that, whatever that number that is, and you get the ROIC percentage. The higher the number, the better, pretty much always. The only time it's not necessarily great is if the company has a lot of goodwill. I don't subtract goodwill from my ROIC calculation because I want the most conservative number possible, and if you leave that number in there, it's going to be more conservative. So, because you add that, so it makes the denominator bigger. When you compare it to the EBIT, the cash conversion cycle essentially measures the cycle it takes a company to turn its cash into inventory, its inventory into sales, and its sales into more cash. That's why it's called the cash conversion cycle, because it's literally a cycle. This is ultra important for companies like the one we're looking at right now, which is a manufacturer. It's ultra important for retailers, ultra important for companies like Amazon that sell stuff, hard physical products. This metric is ultra important for companies that sell, any company that sells hard physical products. It's not very important for companies like insurance companies, internet-based companies, software companies, any of these kind of companies. It's typically not really important at all. But for companies that produce hard assets and either sell or produce hard assets, this number is ultra important. Goodwill shows up on the balance sheet as an accounting term. Goodwill's technical definition is the excess value that a company paid in excess of another company's net assets when they acquired a company. What does that mean? Essentially, it means that the company paid was worth this on a net asset value, and the company paid this. Why is this number useless 99.9% of times? Because 99.9% of times it's just purely a financial accounting number. It has no economic bearing on the company whatsoever, except when a company has to impair their goodwill. I want to talk about the 12 resources every serious value investor needs to read. These resources are mainly value investing focused, but they are also how to learn better focused, how to get the proper mindset, how to build great habits, those kind of things as well. These are my top 12 resources that every value investor should read. Every serious value investor needs to read to become a better value investor, better thinker, frankly, a better person, especially when it comes to the habits and the mindset issue. I don't use these valuations. I use and teach 12 plus different valuation techniques, from intrinsic valuations to relative valuations. But I don't use DCF valuations. Never have, probably never will. Why? Especially if 90+% of other investors use these kind of valuations. Why don't I use them? Several reasons. First is when I was years ago, this is probably 6, 7, 8 years ago now, I was taking Aswath Damodaran's of NYU Stern, his valuation course. He's considered a master at valuation. He advises people like Goldman Sachs and their analysts on valuation. He talks about valuation on his blog all the time. And I was taking his free course when I was still learning value investing and valuation. And I remember in his course, and this again was 6, 7, 8 years ago, and I still remember it to this day, years later, that this line, I don't remember the exact example, but I remember most of the line is what he said, and I immediately thought, I'm never going to do this valuation. Since we're coming up to the end of the year here, I wanted to talk about some of the best things I've learned from all year, because I learn an enormous amount. I learn extremely fast. I learn a lot, all these kind of things. So I wanted to kind of recap some of the best things I learned all year to help you reach your goals next year faster with whatever they are: finance, value investing, businesses, family, whatever they are. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is 10 best things I learned from all year. These aren't necessarily in any order. And I have the sheet right here. Normally I don't like to read off scripts because I suck at it, but I didn't want to forget any of these. So these aren't in any particular order. All of them are fantastic. And at the end, I'll probably tell you the single best thing I learned from all year. But other than that, they're not really in any particular order.